questions. Thank you.
Animal House.
Yeah.
Good morning. This is the Palm Beach Post editorial board interview with Governor Charlie Crist. Good morning, Governor.
Morning, Randy.
Thanks
Great
for
to be
coming.
with you. Thanks
Nice
for
to have
having
you
me.
here.
My pleasure.
May we start with questions, or would you like to make an opening statement?
Well, I'll make a small opening if it's all right
That
with
would
you.
be fine.
First, thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you again. Obviously, I think this is an important race for not only for the future of Florida, but the future of our country. I'm running as an independent, and I'm running as an independent because I feel like the political parties have gotten so fractured and Washington is so broken and there's so much finger pointing in our nation's capital that very little is getting accomplished. And it's frustrating to me, and I think it's frustrating to the people of our state. And I think we need a new path and a better way. And, you know, I'm running against two people that are the partisan nominees of their respective parties. And they have to, as a result, listen to what the party bosses tell them, you know, speak off their talking sheets. And it's very hard for either of them to do what I think only I can do in this race, and that is try to choose the best of both. You know, no matter what issue might come along, I think it's important that we have a common sense voice in Washington on behalf of our fellow Floridians. Florida's a common sense state. We have great people, and I look forward to your questions. And thank you.
Let's begin by trying to narrow your position down on some of those issues. You were for the economic stimulus, then against it, then sort of for it. You've had several positions on the health care law and different positions on parts of the health care law. You were against expanded oil drilling, then you were for it, including near Florida, then you were against it. You were for the teacher merit pay bill, then against it, and you were against running as an independent, and then you ran as an independent. Could you explain where you think your credibility is after all these position changes?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think that Floridians and most people want somebody who is thoughtful and willing to understand that you need to analyze facts and circumstances as they change. And as facts and circumstances may change, so do hopefully opinions. And I'll go in the list that you gave. Let me talk about the stimulus. I don't think I was ever against it. I think that I was probably the first governor who really embraced it in a way that caused a lot of angst, I guess, among my former party members, simply by going to Fort Myers and welcoming the new president to our state on his first visit after being sworn in was something that was viewed very unfavorably by some Republicans. I don't want to paint the brush too broad. But I thought it was important that we have that money because I knew we needed it as your governor. I knew we needed it in order to save, as we have, 20,000 educators' jobs. I knew we needed it to save another additional 60,000 jobs, many of them people who work in law enforcement, to keep our communities safe and our people safe and our children safe in school. I think it was important because at the time, our economy was literally falling off a cliff. And during those kinds of times, you need to do something that will have a positive impact and make sure that we stabilized the patient, if you will, the American economy at the time. And I know it was the right thing to do. And you know, some in my party, my former party, didn't agree with it, and that's okay. They have that right. But I have not wavered on my support of it. I'm adamant about it. I'm proud of it. I know it was the right thing to do for Florida. And at the end of the day, every governor in America ended up taking it. Healthcare. Let me talk about that for a minute. I think that what has passed in Washington, D.C. Could be better. And again, this illustrates the problem, you know, in a race like this where you would have had I not gone independent, two partisan nominees for each respective party. One has to hate the bill. The other has to love the bill, by definition. That's how Washington works today. Only I can come to you and say we need to fix this bill, that there are good parts and bad parts to it. The good parts that I see in the health care bill are the fact that it gets rid of what I would refer to as health insurance company discrimination, whereby if you have a pre-existing condition, you can't get coverage. This bill addresses that, and I think that's positive. In addition, it also says that those who are 26 years of age can still remain under their parents' plan if they have one and they're under it. I think that's another good part. The difficulties I see in the bill and that what I would like to fix and change are, number one, the $500 billion it takes out of Medicare Advantage, particularly for a state like Florida. I think it's very important.
And it's not all out of Medicare Advantage.
136 is out of Medicare Advantage.
A significant number. We can agree on that. And that's
Okay.
not good for Florida. And I want to compliment Senator Nelson because he is trying and has tried to address that issue on behalf of many seniors in our state. The other thing is that I think it's too much tax, it's too much mandate, and I would offer, I think, what would be a better view is what we've done in Florida. Although I wish more had signed up for it, Cover Florida Health Plan offers a range of health coverage to Floridians who either didn't have it before or recently lost their job. As you know better than me, there are about 4 million Floridians that don't have health insurance. So Cover Florida offers it with a reduction in what it would cost. And I think the two real problems with health care in our country are access and affordability. And it seems to me that whatever it ends up being from the federal government needs to address first and foremost those two problems. And we did it in Florida. We gained access to individuals who didn't have coverage and reduced the price from $600 or $700 a month to about $150 a month. And they can choose between plans, not necessarily a mandate from the government, and no tax increases from the government, but simply by our administration negotiating with health insurance companies for their benefit. So I'm very proud of that. Drilling. Offshore oil drilling, I've never liked. I grew up in St. Petersburg on the Gulf of Mexico. And back when I was a state senator, I fought oil emulsion being brought into Florida and up into the West Coast by Florida Power and Light at the time because I thought it was wrong. Because I remember as a kid literally cleaning off water birds because we had an oil spill in Tampa Bay.
1969.
That's right. Very good. And so I, when you fast forward to 2008, when some view it as a change of position, what it really was a question posed to me during the middle of the presidential campaign. And Senator McCain earlier in the day, I don't remember the exact date, I apologize, had come out and said that he felt that states individually should have the right to make the call, yes or no, about offshore oil drilling. And I was asked, how do you feel about that, Governor Crist? And I said, that sounds like a very good idea. I think Florida should have that right. And some interpreted that as a change of position. Not the case. All it was saying that Florida should have a right to make that call. And I said the only way that I would contemplate looking at it in a more positive light is if it were far enough, clean enough, and safe enough. Well, clearly after what happened with Deepwater Horizon this spring and summer, it has been proven emphatically that it is not far enough, not clean enough, and not safe enough. And that's been my position. And so I am absolutely opposed to it.
But you did favor the House bill in 2009 that would have opened up state waters, correct?
No, not unless it could have been proven that it was far enough, clean enough, and safe enough. And that's been my position. You asked about the merit pay issue. Mm-hmm. And, when the bill first came in and was introduced at the beginning of the session by Senator Thrasher, it was, as you appropriately indicated, advertised and promoted as a merit pay bill. And I'm for merit pay. I'm for accountability, always have been, even as Commissioner of Education for our state. What happens with legislation, as you also know, is during the course of the session, things change. This bill changed. It morphed into something quite different from what it was initially advertised as. And they started adding things to it that I was beginning to be troubled by. For example, it would not reward teachers who got a master's degree any additional compensation or recognition. I didn't like that. Even if they got a PhD, there wouldn't be any additional compensation or recognition. I thought that was punitive. And then it went to the next level and said even if they were nationally board certified, there wouldn't be any additional compensation nor recognition. But for me, the change that really was the straw that broke the camel's back was how they would evaluate teachers of special needs children. And the legislation ultimately said that even if the teacher taught special needs children, they would be evaluated as though they were teaching other students that weren't special needs or blind or deaf. I just visited the School for the Deaf and Blind in St. Augustine this week, and it's a very different situation and scenario. and the lack of fundamental fairness that that would present to those teachers after I got a call literally from a friend of mine that I went to high school with named Mike Lusignan. And he called me. He has a special needs son, goes to school in Pinellas County. And this is Easter weekend. Carol and I were in Southwest Florida. And he said, Charlie, my son's teacher called me literally crying and asking me to try to persuade you to veto this bill because of how it's treating special needs teachers. Well, it touched my heart. And I decided then and there I was going to use this pen. I mean, thank God the Founding Fathers gave us the opportunity in the executive branch when the legislative branch goes off the track, which they did, in my humble opinion, several times this session with the ultrasound bill, this Senate Bill 6 that I thought was punitive to teachers and students. And because of those things, I used this pen. And I think it's important to understand that I stand for things. And when I stand for those things, I will use the authority that the people gave me to fight for them, whether it's women or teachers or our environment or whatever the issue might be. And again, as an independent, the last point you raised, it gives me the unique opportunity, Randy, and all of you, to have the chance to go to Washington unshackled by this partisanship that has really built up, I think even more so this year. We've got extreme right and extreme left. And, you know, George Washington, our only independent president, warned us about this. In his farewell address, he in essence said, if we allow these political parties to get too powerful, we may cripple the country we have just begun. We're there.
But if you were 20 points up, had been 20 points up in the polls over Mr. Rubio, would you have left the party to run as an independent?
Absolutely. Yes, I absolutely would have, because I
Would
think it's
have?
that important. Sure, I would have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just,
And,
But
just,
that's not what you told us a few weeks before you made the move.
well,
right.
things
You were here in late
evolve.
February and just said, I don't see myself running as an independent.
Well, you know, things do evolve and they change. That Senate Bill 6 hadn't come up yet. The ultrasound bill hadn't come up yet. My party left, and I was glad to leave it, at least the right-wing part of it. I couldn't be comfortable there anymore. I mean, literally.
You also said that you favored the gay adoption ban, and now you don't.
Yeah, well, it was a law in the books. I was the former Attorney General. I have a sworn duty.
Didn't mean you had to like it.
I didn't say I liked it. I said I would enforce it.
Nah, you know, you
No,
said
you said
no.
that you thought that children do best in a home with a mother and a father. That's what you
Yeah,
said.
sitting, that pen in
So
that
has
chair.
that changed?
Has that changed?
Yeah.
No, I think what's changed is we have a court ruling that says that the law is unconstitutional. That's what has changed. And I respect the law.
But that,
You had a
that
court-
law,
you had
that
a
ruling was in effect when you were here in
Trial
February,
court,
though.
not the DCA ruling, but the
The
trial
DCA
court
ruling.
ruling was in
I'm-
effect.
Okay, I'm referring to the DCA ruling.
Okay.
Which has statewide implication. I'm a statewide office holder.
And are you going to appeal that? Or do you think that the ruling should be appealed?
I don't think I'm going to appeal it. What I've gotten as an indication from the family is they would prefer not to. Obviously, they're happy with the ruling. And, you know, the risk you might take by going to the Supreme Court could potentially change that. And I'm happy with the ruling. And I think that what's paramount here is that what should be done is what is in the best interest of the child. And I think the way the ruling has been laid down allows for that throughout the state of Florida without change. And I think that's a very good development, and I support it.
You say you want to be an unshackled independent, but you still would be expected, when you go to Washington, to caucus with one party or the other, yes?
Expected, yes.
And will you?
Maybe, maybe not. And I'm happy to elaborate.
Go ahead.
If I have the honor of winning, I think that what's very important is to go to Washington and ask some very tough questions of both parties before rendering a decision. And those questions would include, what are you going to do to help prop up our economy? What are you going to do to help with job creation in Florida? What are you going to do to help us with the National Catastrophic Plan? You know, what are you going to do to protect our environment and meet your obligation as it relates to the Everglades? And depending on which answers I get from the two, try to reach a decision that I think is best for Florida.
Well, which way are you leaning now?
I'm not.
You've seen what's going on. I mean, you've looked at Congress. Do you think that the issues are going to change very much, or the positions of the parties will change very much?
I think a lot will depend on how the outcome of the election is. And then I think it's important and prudent to say, what are your plans for the next Congress, the next 2 years? You know, what each party would present would determine the answer to that question. And the answer could be, caucusing with one or the other, or not at all.
Well, let's just give one example. Senator Jim DeMint, Republican from South Carolina, was quoted just a short time ago as saying, whatever happens in the midterms, he intends to, quote, block everything the Obama administration wants
That's
to do.
enlightened.
Every appointment, every whatever. Would you consider that a responsible position for either party?
No, of course not. I mean, the notion that, you have this party of no that currently is in the Congress and in the minority, I think is absolutely wrong. Let me give you a very recent, clear example. The Democratic President of the United States of America proposes tax cuts. The Republican Party says no. I mean, it's all on its head up there.
You're referring to the idea that he would keep the tax cuts for some, but let them expire for the wealthiest Americans.
Right, and I think we ought to have them all continue. I support that. But right after the president made that statement that he would support it at least up to $250,000, John Boehner said, that might not be a bad thing. At least we can do something for the people. Within hours, that was gone. and the wrath of the Republican right came down on the guy's head, led by Senator McConnell, and said, no, it's our way or the highway. It's all or nothing. Well, that's just not right for the people. And that's what I'm referring to. You've got the two parties that are fighting with each other. They're kind of in their club, if you will. But what's right for the people is out of the equation.
A lot of the discussion about the Senate over the last few years has been over the fact that under Senate rules, you need basically 60 votes to do anything because of the filibuster rule.
Right.
Do you think the 60-vote rule should be eliminated?
I do. I think most people in a democracy embrace the notion that a majority should be enough. I think it should be too. I mean, why have it, different than that?
And do you also favor ending the rule, the so-called blue slip rule, where one senator, without explaining why, and not even always with disclosing himself or herself, can stop any appointment?
I really haven't analyzed that one yet. I can see where there could be opportunities for that to have some merit based upon whatever the issue might be. And it also gives you the ability to filibuster, which I think is important. It kind of goes back to free speech, if you will.
I thought you were against the filibuster rule.
I'm not against a filibuster opportunity to be able to speak on the floor as long as you want.
Okay.
No, what I'm against is that 60 vote requirement. I think a simple majority should be
But you
sufficient.
need 60 votes to shut the person up so you can get
To cut off
something done.
debate, right.
I think it ought to be a simple majority to do that.
Okay.
Was my answer to your question.
Okay.
Why do you think the tax cuts should be extended for everybody?
Well, because I think that more money that's in the pockets of individuals or small businesses can give us an opportunity to have greater job creation.
Permanently or for 1 year?
I'd like to see it permanent.
Then how would you make up that $4 trillion that they say it's going to cost the country's
Over
budget?
10 years.
Well, I'm an optimist. and in my optimistic view, I am hopeful that the economy begins to turn around. And whenever the economy has started to turn around, it helps every level of government be able to meet the needs of the people. I mean, it happened, tax cuts, in a positive way when John Kennedy was elected and cut taxes. We ended up doing better. It happened when Ronald Reagan got elected and we reduced taxation. We ended up getting more to provide services to people.
But when when President Kennedy cut taxes, we were a creditor nation running an annual surplus. When President Reagan did it, we were on the way to becoming a debtor nation, but the debt was a lot smaller. Now we have a debt and deficit that most economists say is unsustainable.
And that
On this
economic
path.
growth will not get you out of it. And
Well,
especially
some
if you
say that.
lose $4 trillion in revenue.
I understand. But I think we need to do in Washington what we do in Tallahassee. Fight to balance the budget, reduce spending. As your governor, I cut spending more than any governor in the history of the state. Over $7.4 billion in spending cuts. In addition, we reduced taxes. And we continue to live within our means. Constitutionally, we're required to do so. But we also...
You had to cut the budget. The economy
well,
went south on
We
you.
could have raised taxes, Randy. There were options.
Well, you did
You
raise
did,
fees.
you raised fees.
Well, we raised taxes on cigarettes, and I'm glad we did. And I was happy to sign the bill, because it's not good for you and you shouldn't do it.
Wouldn't your friends in the Republican Party, though, take credit for the no new taxes more so than
Would
the
they take
governor?
credit for that?
The legislature?
Well, I think you work as a team. I think unless you have, as I indicated before, unless you have the executive, you can't do some of those
So
things.
how would you balance the federal budget?
I think there's several ways you can do it. I would do it the same way we did it in Tallahassee. Look at all the programs, see what they're providing to the people, try to be able to increase those programs or at least sustain them that you think are the most important to the people that you serve, like education. We were able to increase our funding for education in spite of reducing $7.4 billion. We were able to make sure that we held the line as it related to law enforcement. We've got the lowest crime rate in the state of Florida in 39 years right now because we didn't cut back on supporting law enforcement in our state. I'm very proud of that. And we protected the most vulnerable, which I think is incredibly important for us to do, especially in a tough economy.
Every economist, though, says that the driver of the debt and our long-term financial problems is going to be Medicare. You've just said, though, that one of the
Or
objections
Social
you
Security,
have,
some argue.
not as much as Medicare, but you've said that one of the things you don't like about the health care bill is the cuts to Medicare. So how would you address the Medicare spending problem?
One way I would address it to try to get more revenue for programs that are necessary and I think we need to honor, like Social Security, unlike my opponents, by the way. My opponent, Marco Rubio, says that he wants to raise the age of eligibility and cut benefits. My other opponent, Congressman Meek, says that he wants to punt it to a commission. We all know what that means. Every time it goes to a commission, they raise the age of eligibility and they cut benefits. I don't think either are appropriate because I think it's a promise to our senior citizens that we need to honor. And Paul Krugman wrote a great piece not long ago making the point that Social Security is one of the few programs in Washington that actually is working. Yet for some strange reason, it's under attack, at least solvent until 2037 or 2041. And so it seems to me that, seniors, especially in a state like Florida where we have a significant senior population, the people we send to Washington need to understand this better and need to realize they need to fight for senior citizens and protect them. And one way I think we can help do it is with good immigration policy. Robert Rich talked about this, and what it is that you first secure the border. Let me be comprehensive on this issue. First secure the border, but also create a pathway to citizenship that is not amnesty but earned citizenship for people to be able to become active in the American economy and our American society and paying into programs such as Social Security as we are currently because we have to pay the payroll taxes, the FICA tax. If we have that kind of a thoughtful, comprehensive immigration reform, the 11 to 14 million people that are not currently citizens would become citizens and pay into the system, help it be more solvent, and help our bottom line in Washington, D.C.
You think
Neither of
illegal-
my opponents will do that.
Do you think illegal immigrants take jobs from Native Americans?
Probably. I think so. Probably a little bit just to the west of us right here. A lot in agriculture, I
But
suspect.
none of what you just said gets to Medicare, which was Randy's original question about the Medicare cuts and why you oppose them. Most of the Medicare cuts are not even benefit cuts. They are eliminating fraud, waste and abuse, spending caps and things like that. They do not limit benefits or cut benefits to seniors. So A, why are you opposed to the Medicare cuts when it speaks to fraud and abuse? And how would you change it? If you're not going to cut Medicare, then what do you cut?
Well, I think we should reduce fraud and waste. Let me go
But the
out on
cuts
that
do
limb
that.
with you. Well, we should eliminate fraud and waste. I'll leave it at that. And one way that I would try to shore things up is what I just talked about that nobody's talking about. And I think that in this race, as I said, I have my Republican and Democrat opponent. And my Democrat opponent, nice fellow, but the congressman says that he doesn't want to put forward any kind of a plan and let some commission do it. Well, why do you run for office if you don't have a thoughtful plan of some kind to try to address the issue? And as it relates to Marco Rubio, to put forward raising the age of eligibility for people who have been promised this. And the argument a lot put behind that is that, well, people are living longer, so it's no big deal. I respectfully disagree. The people who live longer, typically in our society, are the more well-educated or the more affluent. And so what that argument forgets are working people. If you have a laborer that becomes 67 years old and you take away their benefits, and you expect them to continue to be a laborer until they're 70, or whatever the age is that he would put on it, I think that's unrealistic, and I think it's discompassionate, and I think it's wrong. And so, they have their talking sheets and they go off them for a while, but when it comes to the human factor and what it means to real people, particularly working people, it's not a compassionate point of view.
So what is?
And I don't think it would represent Florida well.
So what is your plan for Social Security?
I just described it, at least in one
Immigration.
You
sense.
just said that you would do nothing until 2037 when it becomes insolvent.
No, I
You
said I
said
would have
immigration policy.
comprehensive immigration policy that would attempt
It's not
to,
going to address Social Security.
it would help.
Well, what's your plan to do more than just a 1% change in the revenue structure?
Well, that's my first plan,
What's your
and
second
the
plan?
other is try to restore the economy so that it's improving, the way I think it's starting to do right now.
But in 2017, Social Security will be spending more than it brings in. So it's not just 2037 when there'll be a crisis. There'll be a crisis very soon. And that's why they're talking about things like the payroll tax, lifting the ceiling on the payroll tax. Do you support that?
No, I don't.
Keep it at 100 and...
Somebody has to fight for the senior citizens in this state and try to find a better way to do these
I don't
things,
think any plan, though,
particularly
talks
when-
about changing benefits to them now. All the stuff is phased in. Even the increase in the age to 66 is being phased in. It's not even affecting people who are nearing retirement age.
Well, should we phase out the promise that we've made to people? I don't
We've
think
done
we
it
should.
before.
We may disagree on that point, but that's where we are.
If we can't afford it and you want to balance budgets...
I think we can.
Yeah, you can't change your promises.
I think that we can.
You mentioned that the state had increased funding for education, but the only reason you were able to do that is because of the stimulus. And that, of course, increased the deficit, the federal deficit. Have you done anything to leave the education system in this state in better shape when that stimulus runs out?
Yeah, well, let's realize what the idea of the stimulus was. The idea of the stimulus was to make sure that the patient didn't, fall off the table. And in my humble opinion, it had that effect. I think the president was right to advocate it, and I think the Congress was appropriate to pass it.
Do you
And I
think
think
that-
we were right as states to take it and use it for your benefit and for our teachers' benefit.
The House Republicans have called for returning all unspent stimulus money to the Treasury, and also all repaid TARP money, and no more stimulus. Do you agree with that? Would you be willing to look at further stimulus programs in the future?
I'm willing to say that I think we need to continue to utilize the stimulus dollars that were granted to Florida for Florida's benefit. And I think it's important that we stay on that to make sure that the economy continues to stabilize and doesn't slip back. I think that with the TARP funds that President Bush advocated and the Republicans supported and voted for and passed, they thought it was okay then. Then President Obama gets elected, comes into office, advocates a similar program to help people and to help with infrastructure and to help with education and health care. And all of a sudden, it's a bad idea, and all we did was change the quarterback. I mean, to me, that was hypocrisy on behalf of Republicans to say that. 3 months earlier, they voted for that kind of stuff. And then you get, the new president advocating the same kind of thing to try to help the economy. In President Bush's case, it was, to keep, Wall Street from tanking. In President Obama's case, it was to make sure that the states didn't fall off the cliff. And both seem to have worked. Now, different people have different ideas about whether they worked. My Republican opponent says it didn't save or help anybody's jobs. I'd like him to look into the eye of 20,000 educators in Florida and the additional 60,000 people who still have jobs today that wouldn't have a paycheck if he had been governor of your state. In fact, he stated in an interview with NBC in Tampa Bay one day that he actually would have taken it. But that happens. I think the point of the matter is that it was the right thing to do, the responsible thing to do, and maybe I just advocated it more quickly than other governors around the country did. And I welcome the president in the process, and that was viewed in a pejorative way by some members of my former party. And shame on them for that.
Regarding the financial bailout, officially known as the Troubled Asset Relief Program that Jack just referred to, most polls show that people don't like it. But there is a report that just came out yesterday showing that it will cost far less than anyone projected and might even turn a profit. No Democrat really seems to be running on casting a vote for that. And the Republicans, I think, in their Pledge to America, say that they want to pull back any unused TARP funds already. Had you been in the Senate, would you have voted for the financial bailout troubled asset relief program, and do you think it's been successful?
I think it was important to do, and like I said earlier, I think, you know, it kept Wall Street from collapsing at the time. And in the case of the Recovery Act, or stimulus as it's better known as, you know, it saved states from collapsing like ours. I mean, we needed the money. I think it's important to remember where we were at the time, what was happening with the American economy and the global economy. I mean, we have experienced the worst economic meltdown since the Great Depression. This has not been an easy time to govern for anybody, a governor, a president, a legislator. It's been difficult. It's easy to be governor when money's flowing, like it was for my predecessor. It's much easier to govern, you know, when the times are good. It's hard to govern under these circumstances, and sometimes you have to do dramatic things to make sure that the country continues to move forward and it doesn't collapse. And I think that's what they did.
Florida leads the country in foreclosures, and most of the programs that have been done in Washington so far have not been successful. The experts say that what will be successful is giving bankruptcy judges the right to write down the principal on the mortgages, which a bill was passed in the House but died in the Senate. Would you vote in favor of that bill if it comes up again?
I would, because I think the people need help. You know, they want to meet their mortgage. They want to be able to have the opportunity to keep their home, and why shouldn't they? You know, even if it's my Republican opponent who apparently experienced foreclosure. I think it's important to do whatever we can to make sure that people have the opportunity to have the American dream, to own a home. And if you can simply have a common sense approach, you know, I don't understand why banks don't go to people and say, look, we know you can't meet the obligation every month. How about 3/4 of it? Or how about half? We'll try to work out a plan with you so we can all get through these tough times. The alternative is the bank ends up holding property that's reduced in value. It's not really good for them. And you kick a family out of a home. So why don't they do the common sense thing that I think that would do and provide? It's the right approach.
Your former party members, John Boehner, who wants to be House Speaker should your former party take over the House, they vowed to kill health care. They have the same opposition to it that you do, the Medicare cuts, the taxes, and the mandate. Would you participate in that party's effort to repeal health care, or they vow not to fund it?
I would participate in Americans' opportunity to create greater access and affordability. And I'm the only candidate in this race who can come to you and say, some things in the bill are good and some things in the bill are not. And that's, again, the argument for an independent candidacy. You know, there's very little in life that is either loved or hated. Yet my two opponents have that position on this issue because their party tells them to. And I think everybody in America understands that we need to do something about health care. We need to address it in a responsible way. We need to get rid of the bias of, you know, if you have a pre-existing injury, you can't get coverage. That's fundamentally wrong.
So you would keep that, but what would you get rid of?
I would get rid of the Medicare reductions that we discussed earlier, whatever the amount might be.
What about the mandate?
Pardon me?
The mandate.
I think the mandate's probably unconstitutional. I mean, the courts will tell us that, the third branch of government.
Problem is, though, that a lot of those good things you like are to be paid for, in a sense, by letting the insurance companies sign up a whole lot of new clients who are not buying health care right now.
Who would be mandated?
Lower risk, who would be covered by the mandate. So if they don't have to participate, where do the companies get the money to cover all these new benefits that are part of the legislation, the benefits you want to keep?
Well, as you probably know, I'm not a big insurance company fan. Haven't been for a long time. And so I really don't care if their bottom line is a little bit less than it might be because the program doesn't help them that much. Not my greatest concern. My greatest concern is with the people and giving them an advocate and an honest broker and an independent voice in Washington who can cut through the fog of all this partisan stuff that's going on and not helping our country.
Aren't you running the risk, though, then, of if you just tell them basically take it or leave it, to have them do what the property insurance in Florida, insurers in Florida have done, is basically start cutting benefits and lopping people off and doing all the things that led to the reason to pass health care reform in the first place?
I don't think so. I think that if you look at a piece of legislation in a thoughtful way, with good budget analysis, that you can rely upon and have confidence in, and put forward a plan that really makes sense and that would be solvent, I think that's what the people of Florida expect a U.S. Senator to do, and it's what's good for the country to do it in that way. It's not all or nothing. It's not take it or leave it. Those things don't get anything productive done. Washington has proven that. It is some of several things done in a responsible, comprehensive way that says, look, we have to think about what's right. We have to bring people to the table. It's what I did in education here in Florida. After I vetoed this bill, we were going for race to the top funds to help our schools. That was another way that we were able to help. It wasn't just the stimulus. It was $700 million more that we won. The reason we lost on the first try is that the teachers weren't present. They weren't at the table and part of the discussion. So one of the things I did after vetoing the bill was say, you all have to come together and work together so we can present a plan to the Secretary of Education and try to win this thing. And we did it. We got it done for our state. I think that's the way healthcare should be approached. That's the way education should be approached. Bring all the parties to the table, review it in a comprehensive, respectful way among them, and do what's right for the country.
You said it's easy to govern during good times.
Easier, maybe not easy.
All right,
easier.
but with regard to the healthcare bill, it sounds as though what you're saying is you're in favor of all the things that people think are popular and you're against the things that people don't like so much.
No, those are the things I like.
All right. So,
It's,
okay.
You know, if other people like it too, that's fine.
All right.
Could you?
Nothing wrong with that.
A couple of foreign policy questions. Are
Sure.
you in favor of the New START treaty to reduce nuclear weapons for the United States and the Russians?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the drawdown on nuclear weaponry, I think, is critically important. I think, particularly as it relates to the potential for that development in Iran. You know, you look at Ahmadinejad and the kind of leadership, if you quote unquote want to call it that he has provided. He's a madman. And the threat to Israel is real and present, in my view. And I think that it is important that our foreign policy respect our allies, like Israel, who is probably one of our best allies, along with Great Britain on the planet. I think it's important that we honor that we try to reduce nuclear weaponry on the planet.
And in Afghanistan, do you think that President Obama has set the right course there, and do you think that the United States will be able to be withdrawing a year from now?
I think he has set the right course. I think that it's important to continue the effort. I am hopeful that we'll be able to draw down next summer. I also think it's critical that he rely on the thoughts of the generals on the ground, particularly General Petraeus. I think he's a great military leader. I happen to know him, and it gives me even more confidence that at that time, in July of next year, with consultation by the Commander-in-Chief with the General, I think they can come to a very good decision about whether it's appropriate at the time.
Recent polls indicate that you are losing support to both Marco Rubio and Kendrick Meek. Could you tell us what your strategy is between now and Election Day?
Yeah, to do exactly what I'm doing with you today. Just tell the truth about what this race is about and what's at stake with our future. That if you elect either one of them, you elect another partisan United States Senator to go to Washington and join the fun and do nothing. And you'll have it for 6 more years if you do it, Florida. I mean, that's really what this is all about. You know, they are already on the team that they're on. And if they go to Washington, they've already picked where they're going to be, who they're going to caucus with. And you can see it in what they talk about right now. You know, just as it is with health care. As I said earlier, one hates it, one loves it because they have to. They are told to do that. And if I communicate effectively enough, you know, with the people of Florida, I think the dynamic changes. I think that we'll get a lot of Democratic support, being perfectly candid with you. And I think a lot of that is because of my support for educators, my support for women. I'm running against a guy on the right who literally wants to overturn Roe versus Wade if he gets to the U.S. Senate, Marco Rubio. Now, I think that will frighten and concern women, and justifiably so. And while I am pro-life too, I don't want to impose my will on other people because I respect women. I think it's dead wrong. And I'll advocate that, and I will talk about that. And you had a great article in the paper this morning about the fact that women are going to have a significant voice in this election across the country. and that they're swing voters in many respects. The other thing that I think is important, on your front page today, God bless you, it talks about the registration in Palm Beach County. And the largest single increase in registration is among independents. People are sick of this. Talk to anybody in West Palm Beach or anywhere in Florida or America. How's Washington doing? You real pepped up about the Republicans and Democrats and the storm that they have going up there? They can't get anything done. This president came in with great promise about trying to reach across the aisle, trying to work with Republicans and Democrats to move our country forward and get rid of this stuff. Remember his famous line? We're not red states and blue states. We're the United States of America.
So do you think that the failure of Washington to show a new tone in almost 2 years is more President Obama's fault or more the Republicans' fault?
I think it's the Congress's fault. I think it's the House of Representatives and the members of the U.S. Senate. But I still have hope, because I think that there are members of the Senate that I think want to change that. And very good people. And that's what gives me optimism if I have the opportunity to win. There's good people like Mark Warner from Virginia, or Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, Richard Lugar from Indiana. I mean, I know in my heart there are people there that this sickens. Evan Bayh got so sick of it he left. You know, but we can't give up. It's our country. And, you know, when these people argue all day long on cable TV, we're not the only ones watching. The world is watching that, too.
Well, in a sense, though, you had your own appointment to the Senate. You elected a senator all by yourself, Senator Lemieux, and he has pretty much been voted with Republicans straight party line. There have been a couple waivers, but pretty much that's been it.
That's a disappointment.
Can you tell me a couple of votes where you would have voted differently from him?
I'll give you a recent very good example, the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act that would have, again, gone to the immigration issue says that if somebody is under 15 years of age and comes to our country, doesn't get in trouble with the law, and has the opportunity to go to 2 years of college and or 2 years of military service and is honorably discharged, they earn their way to citizenship. I wish they had passed that in the Congress. I wish that had become law. The argument, I think ridiculous argument that Republicans made on that issue was, we can't put that into a military appropriation bill, it's just not right. Well, we can do two things at once in America and keep moving forward, in my humble opinion. And they should have done it. It's the right thing to do. It would have helped us with immigration policy. And I have a personal story that relates to it. My grandfather, who immigrated to this country from Cyprus, he was 14 when he came in 1912. After he got here, he joined the military. He ended up fighting in World War I and earned his citizenship because he was honorably discharged. It was good then. I think it would be good now. And that's just one example where I would have voted differently.
Another military-related hot-button issue is don't ask, don't tell. Would you vote to repeal that?
I would. You know, I think our country really has come a long way and is in a place where we are less judgmental, at least some. I mean, that's probably not the case with my Republican opponent, but I think that it is the case with most of America. That, you know, regardless of, you know, different aspects of somebody's way of life, they still should have the opportunity to fight for our country if they want to.
Another thing Americans are sick of is political corruption. So could you address the allegations regarding Mr. Greer and his spending and his alleged spending on your Senate campaign?
Right. Well, I don't think he spent anything on my Senate campaign except the contribution that I gave back to him. And as it relates to the party spending, I think the jury is still out on that, literally. Fortunately, in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty, and there's been no guilty verdict yet. So as a former Attorney General, advised by Bob Butterworth, it is just as important to exonerate the innocent as it is to prosecute the guilty, and we just don't know the facts yet.
Jay Bermer has been described as a friend of yours. He was an aide. He went to your wedding. He got a $315,000 in payments over 3 years from the Republican Party of Florida. People there don't know what he did, don't even know if he did anything. And Jim Greer has even said that he had nothing to do with bringing Mr. Bermer in. Did you have a role in Mr. Bermer getting this job?
Well, I think he's a bright guy, number one. He is a friend, and he did go to my wedding. All of that is true. The facts and circumstances of his compensation with the party, I was not aware of.
you weren't aware of the party spending that much money on
That's correct.
a
I
key
was not.
person.
That's right. Well, I got a state to run. I mean, I know I was a Republican, but you have a chairman to run the party. You have a governor to run the state. And just like at DCF, I appointed, Bob Butterworth to run the agency. I don't get involved with running the agency that now George Sheldon is doing very well. My responsibility is to try to pick the best and the brightest that you can.
Was Jim Greer the best and the brightest?
He may not have been. But, the same thing that happened to me with that scenario, well, not quite the same yet, happened to Governor Bush. He selected a guy to be the Secretary of the Department of Corrections. He's now in prison. I mean, just like you hire people here at the newspaper, maybe some of them do things after you hire them that you didn't anticipate or didn't foresee.
Do you want to address the Disney trip and why there was so much spending on hotel rooms in your name and your family's name?
There wasn't so much in my name or my family's name. My family paid for all of our expenses there, and I made that clear. And the party should apologize to me and my family and the people of Florida by innuendo implying that the party paid for me. I'm one of these guys who pays for my own stuff. I'm one of the cheapest guys you'll ever meet.
You don't remember any time when you guys were eating and Greer said, "Let me get this"?
No.
He never picked up a check
No.
for you.
No.
And you have receipts for everything.
I provided them to the press.
So the audit was simply wrong in
Dead wrong.
assigning those to your rooms.
It didn't assign them to our room. With all due respect,
It did what?
it assigned them to Mr. Greer. And then the speculation from the audit was maybe he paid for Crist. False. I mean, I get invited to all kind of things as your governor. And I'm one of these guys who, when I go to a football game or a basketball game, I give a check to the person who invites me. And they say, "Oh, Charlie, you don't have to do that. Nobody else does." I said, "Well, yeah, you have to do it. It's the law. I do it routinely. I don't accept stuff. I pay for it."
Well, if you go back far enough, I believe you have taken trips on private jets and reimbursed individuals or corporations at what would be a commercial airline level. as
That's what
opposed
the
to
law requires.
What the law requires, but it's not
I-
full reimbursement.
It's what the law requires.
Okay. On the point of innocent until proven guilty, you signed a bill allowing red light cameras in Florida, which presume you guilty until you prove your innocence by nature. You think that was can you explain why you signed that bill to allow them?
It's a safety issue. Too many people get maimed or even killed by people who run red lights. The idea is to be a deterrent.
So if it's all about safety, why did the state have to take a slice of the money?
Well,
big
probably
sli-
because
big-
they
a
needed
very
the
big
money.
slice of the
And
money.
I suspect that the appropriators in the House and Senate realize that fact.
So it's
So we
not
can
about
continue to
safety.
pay teachers. It's both.
So
Both.
first you said it was about safety, so it's about safety and money?
Yeah, it's about safety apparently and money, according to the appropriators.
Okay.
For me, it was about safety. I can't speak for the others.
Do you
Okay.
have any specific thoughts or steps in mind that you would do if you were elected to get money to the Everglades?
Yeah, and this is frustrating because I think Florida has really met her obligation as it relates to Everglades restoration. And the frustration has been that the federal government simply has not. And I think that, you need stronger advocates to be able to go to Washington on behalf of our state and make sure that that obligation is met. One of the things I'm very proud of in our administration is that we were able to buy a portion of the Everglades to try to restore it and the natural flow. We had to scale it down because of practical matters dealing with the economy. But nonetheless, it's about 27,000 more acres that we have been able to preserve. And I'm very grateful to the management district for following through on that. It wasn't easy. Fan Hools fought it tooth and nail for whatever reason. And in spite of that, they were successful in staying the course and being able to see it through. And I think it's important for the future of Florida to do it.
Let's end the interview with a discussion about one of those political factors and electoral factors you mentioned earlier, and that's the Tea Party.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us whether you think, based on what you've seen, whether you think the Tea Party is a helpful emergence into politics?
Well, I think there's a split of opinion for me on that. I think that, when you look at, I think it was Senator Graham who recently said, it's good to have more people participate in democracy. He's right. Yet I'm concerned about what sort of the Tea Party may represent in who they support and what kind of candidates they present to the country. What's her name in Delaware? O'Donnell, I think it is.
Christine O'Donnell.
Angle in Nevada. Rubio in Florida, among others. And I think what's at work here is a concern, obvious, understandable concern about the economy. I think that overlays sort of what's happening in politics today, and justifiable, and it creates anger, and it creates fear. And I think that anger and fear is manifested by different candidates across the country. And I hope that we can get to a better place as it relates to reasonable minds going to Washington to represent our states, whether they're Delaware or Nevada or Florida.
Well, now, Ms. O'Donnell was, dabbling in witchcraft, for example.
Yeah, it's bizarre as hell.
But you compare her to Marco Rubio, and can you tell me anything that Marco Rubio has done that's in the same league as witchcraft?
No, not that I'm aware of.
But you compared him to her. I mean,
it's not me. It was the New York Times did it. So
you don't think that he is that kind of fringe candidate? Because I thought you said the Tea Party is supporting fringe candidates like Marco Rubio, but.
Oh, I think he's fringe.
And how is he a fringe candidate?
Well, I think he is discompassionate when it comes to the rights of women. He wants to overturn Roe versus Wade, as I mentioned before. I think it's fringe in a state like Florida to not try to protect and secure Social Security, but rather take those benefits away from seniors, especially in a state like Florida. I think it's inappropriate not to want to protect teachers in our school system. He's a Jeb Bush guy. And I think that, they wanted that bill to be signed by me for a host of reasons, many of which maybe I'm not aware of. But I think that, in a lot of different ways, saying that people who disagree with him, Marco Rubio, should leave the country, like Keith Olbermann or Rachel Maddow, that's fringy stuff. Damn right. It's not right.
Didn't you once call Jeb Bush the greatest governor in Florida's history?
That was Leroy Collins.
Okay, but you said Jeb was a great governor.
He did a good job, especially with hurricanes.
One of the other Tea Party rallying cries is that government federal government is guilty of overreach, that it is intruding too much onto individual freedoms. Do you think that the federal government is too intrusive in some areas, and if so, what areas are they?
Well, yeah. I think the taxes that they take are too much. That's why I support the cuts. That's an area, and it's an important area. When you take from people, you reduce their ability to live in a way that they feel is appropriate for them. But I also understand you have to have taxes in order to have programs that we discussed before.
And, 40 years ago, the top rate was twice as high as it was now, and in World War II, it was 90%. So taxes have always been here for 100 years, income taxes, and they've been even higher than they are now. Are there other areas where you think that the Tea Party is right, that there has been excessive intrusion by the federal government into people's lives?
Well, I've always felt that smaller government is better. I still feel that way. Now, I think in recent years, the government has had to step up in order to save the economic mess that we're dealing with.
And are there any areas, if you're elected, where you would go to Washington and think, I'm going to make the federal government smaller here and in this way? And if so, what are they?
I would want to study it first when I got there and have access to the kinds of information that different committees would be able to give you, just as I've done as your governor. I wouldn't want to say beforehand, I'm going to cut this because it sounds good to you today, or to, maybe potential voters across the state. That can be irresponsible, until you have the opportunity to really get into the nuts and bolts of where the military spending is, and if you think it's appropriate, where we're spending on health care, how the education funding is working. I think it's much more important to review those in a comprehensive, thoughtful way before you just lurch forward and say, I'm going to whack the Department of Education. I wouldn't do that.
So as someone who advocates more reasoned debate in Washington and less partisanship, do you think overall the Tea Party has been a positive or negative factor in American politics?
I don't think we'll know until November 2nd. And you know, the outcome of these elections and what kind of people get sent to Washington to represent us. Until then, I don't think we know.
Okay.
I think the jury's out on that.
Last question.
One last question on your other opponent. How do you assess the differences between yourself and Kendrick Meek?
I can win. And I think that it's important in this race, unless you want to have a radical right U.S. Senator, a decision has to be made pretty fast in the next 32 days. What's the reasonable alternative that can be victorious? I'm that person. You know, I'm number 2 in every poll I've seen lately. You see him too. And God bless the congressman. He's a fine person, a good guy. I like him. But I don't want to have Marco Rubio as my United States Senator. And I would appeal to Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, reasonable Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, that if you want a common sense voice for you in Washington, D.C., if you want somebody you can be proud of when he gets there, then you ought to vote for Charlie Crist and rally to it, because we're running out of time.
Thank you, Governor.
No, thank you.
Appreciate you coming by.
It's my pleasure as always, Randy.